All right, guys, we are back with our Monday edition of Seminole Sidelines. I hope everyone that is listening and watching, whether live or tape, had a great weekend. It was certainly a busy weekend for Florida State athletics, busy weekend in athletics as a whole, as we had a fun final Elite Eight to watch. But, guys, a lot happening on Florida State's athletics. We had FSU's first spring scrimmage. They hosted about 3 dozen under 2025, 2024, 2025, and 2026 prospects. We had baseball, softball. We were running around all over the place. And then, of course, we're going to talk a little bit about several things today. We're going to talk about what people were talking about on Saturday, and that's the FSU coaches. Mike Norvell, Alex Adkins, and Adam Fuller met with the media after the scrimmage on Saturday. This is one of those weird things. I will definitely take access to 13 practices over 2 scrimmages, but it is always interesting to be breaking down or trying to read the tea leaves as to what these coaches are seeing and what they saw. Now, Bob and Jerry, one of we go out every day and make our own evaluations when we're at their standard practice, their regular practices. We do not get to see the scrimmages, but some of what we've seen has been validated by what some of these coaches have said, and we'll kind of get into that. But let's get into it right away with the scrimmage. Mike Norvell obviously came out, and I'm just going to kind of go around the table here. And Bob, I'll start with you. What were your top takeaways from the things that Mike had to say?
I think the big one is the obvious one. The defense is ahead of the offense, which tends to be the case when you're in the spring or in the preseason camp. The defensive line, that depth is going to be the strength up front of the defense. And with a couple of offensive linemen out, maybe some others limited, that's why we can understand the defensive line got the best of it there. I think on the offensive side, good to hear that these coaches wanted to see what Tate Rodemaker and AJ Duffy could do. They got the majority of the reps with the ones, with Jordan Travis nearby, kind of watching, observing, being a coach and a mentor for those younger guys. That's what the spring is all about, is that development for these guys like Tate and AJ. Just they need more and more time on the practice field, whereas Jordan has been that very quiet, consistent, successful guy now going into his 6th year. So good to see storylines like that. The other big one I think is Rodney Hill. Rodney Hill again, I think is solidifying his standing as somebody who's definitely in the mix. Whether he's the number 2 back, number 3 back, he's going to get carries behind Trey Benson. But they really like what Rodney Hill is bringing to the table. A guy who's done everything right. He's added weight. He's elusive. He's really shifty. Kind of has that return man kind of capabilities too. So that there's a lot of this young talent I think is really developing well for Coach Norvell and the staff.
Jerry, what were your first impressions of what Mike had to say after the scrimmage, or your key takeaways from what he had to say?
Well, the fact the defense is ahead is normal and good. I think there's been some springs where we didn't think that. We had some trouble on defense. But the validation that the defensive line is legit is good. I kind of wonder if Travis Jordan is in the scrimmage, is the defensive line is effective, because he brings a whole nother dimension to stopping Florida State's offense. So I think it's good that the defense gets to play without him in the game at this point in the scrimmage in the spring. But I think it's going to be important that they get Travis some reps later down the road. I like the way they did it because Tokars needs to know what he's got with the backups, Duffy, Rodemaker, and Brock. I'd rather learn early what I've got, and then I can develop it as we go. But at some point, you're going to have to get Travis back in the game, not just for his sake. You wouldn't want to go 9 months without him having bullets fired at him. But also for the defense's sake, they need to know if they're as effective on that front with him in the game.
Yeah.
faced quarterbacks like him. Heck, we've faced about 5 of them.
You know, the one thing I thought you would pick out is you're always big on contested catches, and Mike mentioned that, so I thought that would be one of your top 2 or 3 because you get frustrated when the DBs do not compete for a pass, and so apparently there was a lot of that going on Saturday inside Doak Campbell Stadium.
Yeah, that would have been good to see.
Yeah. Again, we're talking about something we have not seen. This is a blind faith episode of Seminole Sidelines. But hey, you're right, Jerry. The defense should be ahead at this time, particularly in a scrimmage where your best player on offense is not on the field. So you would think the defense would have the advantage. How much of a difference? The one thing that stood out to me was he mentioned that there were a lot of explosive plays on offense were brought back because of holding, which makes me think that the defensive line probably would have played just as effectively. Now, they might have had a harder time getting Jordan Travis to the ground than any of the other quarterbacks if he had been live. But the fact that they mentioned holding and that holding penalties had a negative impact on offensive explosive plays allows me to think that this defensive line might be as good as we thought they might be coming in because, listen, they were holding because they couldn't block them. I mean, that's why you hold somebody. So, So anyway, I thought that stood out, which, and he mentioned defense flying around, a lot of explosive plays on defense. So what does that mean? Tackles for losses, sacks, interceptions, fumble recoveries. Those are explosive plays on defense. So it was good to hear that the defense was the better of the 2, particularly given the fact that Jordan Travis was not held out of the scrimmage. And then, there were a couple of things that stood out to me that he said. Number one, and I heard this from various people, Brock Glenn apparently had a very good day at the scrimmage. I don't know if you guys have talked to people that had access, but I have talked to several people that think they're in the know. And then when you listen to what Mike said, and we said this on Thursday, he seems mature beyond his years. Mike's comment, very mature, made some really good throws, made some bad ones. Norvell impressed with composure and intelligence of Brock Glenn, guys. And he mentioned this is a guy that should be a high school senior. You do not want to read too much into it too early. You don't want to put too much on a young man as early as he is. But he has been impressive. Just have you guys heard anything different than that? Does that confirm what you guys have heard from the people you've talked to?
Yeah, very much. I mean, and with my own eyes, I mean, he just looks more prepared than some of the other quarterbacks did coming in. It looks like the game is slower for him than it should be for a typical freshman. And, I was thinking about that a couple of years ago when North Carolina had the freshmen. They've had a couple freshmen now, They've got the kid now that's so good. And prior to that, they had I'm drawing a blank on his name, but came in and played right away as a true freshman. And, a kid that committed to Florida State and then wound up at North Carolina. But they've had 2 freshmen back-to-back that have been pretty much ready-made when they got there. And it just hasn't seemed that way for Florida State. And Brock is about as close to that as we've had at Florida State. And gosh, I don't know when. I can't remember a freshman looking as prepared as he is.
Yeah, I can't either. I mean, we played some young quarterbacks at South Florida when I was there, but none of them were ready. That's for sure. And listen, this kid's got a long way to go before he's ready, but he is, I think he's exceeded everyone's expectations for him coming in what essentially is 9 months early to college. So, listen, it was another thing that was what we had seen at practice was validated in that scrimmage based on what the coaches had seen. So we have been reporting the exact right thing when it comes to Brock Glenn. A couple other things that we listen, Jerry, you have been a big Dre Jacobs fan. We heard Mike talk about he scored a couple of touchdowns, he scored a touchdown a couple of explosive plays, and probably he is what we thought we were getting, and that was one of the best wide receivers in the nation. So, listen, again, a guy that's in school 9 months early. I mean, we're talking about two guys that should be seniors in high school that are making an impact or making an impression on a team that's coming off a 10-3 season. So, to me, that's pretty remarkable. Just what have you guys seen out of Dre at practice that you think makes him special?
I don't think he looks like a freshman for starters. I mean, he could get a little bit bigger and thicker from a strength and conditioning standpoint, but he's not small. I mean, he's what, 6 foot 170-ish. He's not a smaller, slight type of slot receiver. He looks advanced from a route running standpoint. I think that's what really stands out. He tends to make plays just about every practice. Now, how good is he as a perimeter blocker? These are a lot of questions I think we still have to say to be determined from a guy like this. But is he in the mix of your, say top 6 or so receivers who can go out there and play for you in different sets? I think he's definitely there. And we probably should say that there aren't that many true freshmen in the last, 15 or so years who have played a significant amount for Florida State. The list is really Rashad Green, Travis Rudolph, a couple of others. So if he were to have that opportunity to get in there, it would be pretty impressive. But he's also very, very much prepared for that moment. Yeah,
and listen, and then he doubled down on 2 more guys that are here that we really like. He talked about KJ Kirkland, the safety, who we said when he in tour of duty that he did not look like a freshman. And we were all like, well, let's see what happens when they put on pads. And he has not been a disappointment. And then the guy that I have been wanting to see since he got this commitment, Quindarius Jones, a 200-pound cornerback as a true freshman. And listen, Mike said we're very excited about their futures. And it sounds like both of those guys are going to have a role to play based on what's going on now, whether that's special teams, backup, whatever. But again, we're talking about a veteran team where you're having some early arrivals make impacts.
Yeah. In tour of duty, that's where Jacobs caught my eye. He won just about every drill he was in. I mean, just right out of high school, walks into tour of duty and looks like he's been there 3 years. And that speaks to his high school coach, I think, and the preparation, the work that he's no stranger to work. It doesn't look like.
No. And then, go ahead, Jerry. I was just going to say, go ahead.
Well, I just think that then you start getting into one-on-one situations, and he makes plays like other people don't make. Seems like he's beyond his years as a receiver in terms of adjustments he makes to the ball and route running and things like that. But to your point, Pat, you don't get the kind of offense we have where there's so many long runs unless your receivers are downfield doing something and, doing something right. And I think that'll determine how much playing time he gets is how effective is he as a blocker, because there's we have some good receivers who are very effective downfield blocking. So,
yeah. No, Johnny Wilson, we always praise Johnny for the job that he does blocking. Listen, now we got receivers that can catch and block.
Holy mackerel! Can you believe it?
They've come a long way in 5 years. That's for sure.
We couldn't do either before, and now.
No, and listen, and Mike talked about the depth at receiver, and that people are gonna have to continue to fight to earn their way there, and obviously Dre is a guy that is trying to put himself in the mix. We're only less than halfway through spring, so we'll see how these guys continue to develop. Another thing that Mike said that we said this coming into spring, that because of the level of competition up front, it was going to make the offenses and defensive lines better. He mentioned when he was talking about Roddick and Keandre Jones and Byers that they are going to benefit, and so is the other side of the ball for that matter. Verse and Fabian and Josh and Daryl Jackson. But the team and those groups are benefiting from the competition because there are so many good players, and they are deeper than they have been at a lot of those spots, particularly on the offensive line. But just what have you guys seen from, if we're going to recap the first 2 weeks of practice, how would you recap what you've seen from the offensive and defensive linemen, and who stood out to you the most?
Bob, why don't you go?
Yeah, I think the defensive line is maybe the easier one, because I think on the offensive line they are kind of shifting guys around, like a Casey Roddick is playing some center and some guard, so they're trying to just test out some versatility on the O-line, which I think is a great thing, because we know there are going to be injuries up front. We know they're going to have a plan A, a plan B, a plan C, and go all the way through the alphabet, because you see a lot of injuries there. I think Daryl Jackson has been one of the breakaway guys who immediately has stood out to not just all of us. The coaches have pointed out just how good he looks. I think the word polished was used by Adam Fuller, just that you see what they saw on film between Maryland and Miami is starting to show up, what he's doing in practices. Josh Farmer, Patrick Payton being the breakaway, spring practice most improved guy. I think that they both used the most improved award for Patrick Payton, which is great to see a young guy who they brought in as a high school signee has developed through a strength and conditioning standpoint, and then they're seeing that incremental growth. We've seen a lot of growth from these portal guys on both lines, but now how many guys beyond a Patrick Payton, a Josh Farmer, are we seeing start to emerge? I think they're both now in year 3. That's kind of the time where you expect these kind of guys to really feel very, very comfortable and confident about what they can do on the field.
Yeah, and I thought Adam's comment about Patrick, listen, he's the ACC Defensive Rookie of the Year. Sometimes those most improved things are kind of like a backhanded compliment when you've done what this kid's done the first couple of years he's been on campus. But I think what he said was, if you're a defensive lineman, whether you're a defensive tackle or defensive end, you cannot be a finesse player up front. And he talked about the fact that Patrick Payton has gotten more physical. So the way I'm looking at it is he's always been a good pass rusher. We've seen his ability to get to the passer. You always worried about how he hold up in a run against the run, right? Down in and down out because of his size. And so it is good to hear Adam talk about the fact that Patrick has gotten more physical at the point of attack when it comes to the run, because that's where his improvement needed to come from. So I thought that was very telling, and of course you're glad to hear that. And of course now both Mike and Adam both talked about Greedy Vance a little bit. So obviously he's made an impression on those guys in the spring. They're playing them at nickel and corner. He said they're playing a lot of the corners at both spots, both the nickel corner spot and either field or boundary corner. So, we're seeing a lot of intermingling, changing of parts, all that kind of stuff. So, just talk a little bit about what you guys have seen from Greedy so far this spring.
Yeah, I wasn't sure, honestly, with Greedy how much of an upgrade he was going to be when they got him from Louisville. But he seems, with Kevin Knowles being out for the spring, that Greedy's kind of accepted this opportunity to jump in and play some corner, play some nickel. Greedy's, I think, a little bit of a smaller guy, but fights really hard and has played quite well. I think the overall theme of the DB room is maybe a similar one, just that you see a lot of good competition there. I think with the DBs, we've sort of fallen in love with them these last few off seasons, and really how they've performed on the field in the fall has been a little bit hit and miss, even with the past defensive stats that Florida State's had as a team. We have seen some shortcomings out of that group, but I think we're starting to see guys really emerge through that competition, and Greedy's been a really good one. Fentrell Cypress has been a guy that's been praised consistently too by the coaches as somebody who, they thought was going to be a great fit. They thought he was going to work hard and blend in. So yeah, there's a lot of good competition there.
Yeah, and Adam's comment was we knew that Pentrell was a proven player. He's made played a lot of ACC football, a lot of major college football. But he said even more importantly is we knew it was basically what he was saying. He's a fit on the field, but we had to find out when he got here, was he a fit in the locker room and in the building. And of course, as a veteran guy, you would assume that he would be. And they are seeing that he's a fit both on and off the field. And that's what, so I think he's going to be one of their better corners. I think everybody here is expecting him to start. Before we leave, and we'll probably bounce back between all these coaches, but before we leave, Mike, everybody was, all of us were very excited about what they've done at the tight end position through the portal with Kyle Morlock and Jaheim Bell. And we said on our Wednesday show, I think we did a Wednesday show, I can't remember. Or if I was on the Wednesday show, I can't remember if I was on the Wednesday show. But long story short, we had said somewhere after the Tuesday practice that Jaheim Bell had his best practice of camp, and Mike said that practice 5 and 6 were his best practices, and he mentioned that Jaheim Bell has gotten more physical, and that was one of the things that we had noticed, that maybe some of the inline blocking was going to take some time to get used to, but he mentioned that Bell has gotten more physical. He mentioned that Kyle Morlock, who we think is built like a tight end and runs like a receiver, he said he had a couple of nice catches. So those guys seem to be transitioning and into how Mike and the staff run practices and run the program on the field, particularly he has mentioned that both of those kids have made strides since they got here. And then, of course, what we talked about before the season started, or before spring started, you had Alex come back on the back end of the interviews on Saturday afternoon and talk about how deep and how versatile this tight end group is. And, you can line most of these guys up as an attached tight end, an H-back, running back, slot, outside receiver. But he also talked about how this group, and this is what we talked about and what we were excited about coming into the spring, how this group can manipulate personnel groupings, right? So we already know that they are doing things against the FSU defense. For example, you could put Jaheim Bell and Kyle Morlock in the game at the same time, and that's really 11 personnel, but you could line up, well, you would think it's 2 tight ends, right? But you can line up Jaheim as a running back and be in 11 personnel, or you can line both of them up at tight end and have Ja'Kai Douglas in the game as what's usually a slot and line him up in the backfield. But anyway, so we're hearing the coaches starting to talk about the fact of how this group, and particularly Morlock, Bell, Marquiston, even he mentioned Brian Courtney, how these guys are going to help improve FSU's offense because of what they're going to allow them to do from a personnel grouping standpoint. But just what are y'all? I mean, obviously we didn't see them in the scrimmage, but just your early thoughts on the tight end group as a whole, Bob.
I think, could this be the spring that is similar to the spring of 22 for the receivers? Is this the spring where we see that big jump out of the tight end group as a whole? I think it really could be just the elevated competition. It brings out the best in a Marquiston Douglas, in a Brian Courtney, and a Jarrell Powers. They just see this is a standard that I need to rise to. Some of these veterans. I think we've talked about the multiple personnel groupings, what you can do, 3rd and short, 4th and short. Red zone was not pretty for Florida State last year. You saw they had to maybe pass more than they felt like they couldn't run as effectively close to the goal line too, for example. So having more red zone threats, a Kyle Morlock, a Jaheim Bell, throwing those guys into an already pretty impressive mix, with a Johnny Wilson, a Kentron, and whatever Jordan Travis can do throwing or running, you're just adding kind of layers, I think, to the flexibility, to the play calling that Mike Norvell and Alex Atkins can throw out there.
Yeah. Jerry, you have any thoughts you want to share on the tight end group after hearing what Alex had to say?
What I like that Alex does with that tight end group. We talk about, inline blocking and how they use the tight ends in their running game. And I find it interesting how they'll like trap with them. The tight end will be lined up, outside, and then come back in and get an inside trap block on a nose guard. And it's just fascinating the different blocking schemes they have with those tight ends.
Yep.
And this spring, I've been, I think, more aware of that. I guess I've been watching that more.
Yep.
And they can be very effective blockers in that system.
Yeah, I think it's going to be fun to watch what we see. Hopefully, when we see the spring game, or when y'all see the spring game. I don't think I'm going to be here, but if I am, I'm excited to see that group and what they do with them from that personnel standpoint and how they use them as blockers, as you just said, Jerry. Two kids that Adam mentioned that Mike did too. Was KJ Kirkland and Quindarius Jones, but just to give our listeners a idea of what Adam said about KJ, lots of development to go, but can help us as a true freshman. So essentially, right now he is in their plans, whether it's special teams, backup. He has certainly made an impression, and certainly a kid that does not look like a 9-month early enrollee true freshman. And then, of course, he also mentioned that big improvement from week 1 to week 2 from Quintarius Jones, a guy that we thought was, as a whole, was probably one of the more underrated signees in this class, but a large, long kid, about 6'2", 6'3", 200 pounds, can cover a lot of ground. And, we talked about it coming in. They're playing him at corner, which means, listen, we never doubted his athleticism, but he is a longer guy, and you thought he might be a safety or even a linebacker at some point. But obviously he has held his own playing corner at Florida State, which is and making improvement as he goes against guys that are named Johnny Wilson and Winston Wright and now Dre Jacobs and a couple of the others. The names escape me at this point. So, but anyway, so it was nice to see that you had two coaches talking about the same kids, so they're all seeing the same thing. And then a couple other kids that they talked about. This shall be the Daniel. What's Daniel's last name?
Mitchell.
Daniel Mitchell segment of the program. Adam talked about Omar Graham and talked about how they need him to be a good player this year. They has a chance to crack the rotation, but listen, everybody as a linebacker has a chance to crack the rotation because there's not that many of them. But they have seen something in this kid they like. Jerry, you're our resident linebacker guru, and I know Bob saw him last Thursday. He made a couple nice plays, particularly in skill. But just y'all's thoughts on where we are on Omar Graham, and can we get Daniel on the call real quick?
Yeah, let's do it. So Daniel, for those who don't know, Daniel Mitchell was a former Osceola editor back in the 90s, and he saw some good linebackers. And he caught on to Omar when he was in high school. He really liked him because in high school, Omar had a nose for the ball. You found the ball, you're going to find Omar close by. So he has instincts, and he's built a lot like Bethune, Tatum Bethune. They're very similar. And Tatum has become a mentor for Omar. So, and both recruited by Randy at a high school. So there's a big belief system there between Omar, Tatum, and Randy. They both believe in him. So what Randy told me was that at the tail end of last season, Omar really made a move. And it all started to click for him. The light went on. And he could have easily played him in the last 3 games and thought about it, but wanted to save the year. So they've seen something in Omar. He's starting to show it on the field. And Tatum, in an interview we did with him, made that point that he's really proud of Omar and his development. So he's certainly going to get some opportunities, this fall, and in some packages he may compete for starting playing time in some packages. But I like what I see in the kid, and so it'll be fun to watch the rest of the spring.
Yeah, and Bob, just kind of what kind of development you've seen from spring day ones. I mean, Adam did make the comment that they didn't send Omar down to the scout team last year. They let him get all the backup reps up with the, for lack of a better term, varsity, or first and second team, I should say. But just your thoughts on what you've seen. I know he stood out to you at last Thursday's practice.
Yeah, I think he's a guy who, like Jerry's mentioning, could compete for that kind of backup. Could he be in the twos? Could he surpass a Brennan Gant just because of, they really like what Omar's able to do. He's not as tentative. Kalen DeLoach mentioned that last week. There was just some uncertainty in what he saw in Omar. Just wasn't ready just yet to use those instincts to his advantage. Hey, I think we like a lot Kalen and Tatum and what they can bring to the table. It's really about developing depth, because any injury here in this position group is very, very difficult to overcome. We saw, I think when Tatum Bethune went down against Louisville, I had a moment of, oh my goodness, this could really make or break a season, because you just don't have confidence in who's dependable behind some of these guys. Is Omar Graham stepping into that kind of category of a guy you can depend on? Steven Dix has practiced pretty darn well. I mean, better than a bit of a surprise, honestly. Just didn't know what to expect out of Steven. And DJ Lundy, I think, just kind of hangs out there too. Maybe not the best fit for what Florida State's doing, but at least you start to feel like there's a couple guys in the mix there for sure.
Does Dix look a little leaner to you than he did last year? Not as bulky?
Yeah.
Or am I just making that up? Because I know we need backup linebackers.
The thing that again, Randy said about Dix is that he did want him to lose some of his bulk, just like he did with Lundy. So he has leaned him out a little bit, but he said the thing about Dix is when you're dealing with him, you're dealing with a kid who tends to be a perfectionist. And that the problem with that is, paralysis by analysis. If so what he's done, what Randy said he's done is he's simplified the reads from, the previous coach. And so it's easier to do it right. And Dix is particularly concerned about trying to do it right, and that's slowed him down. Pat, you've heard the expression, if you're going to do it
wrong, that's exactly what I was just here thinking.
Do it at full speed.
If you're going to do it wrong, do it at full speed, and if you're going to do it wrong, you better make a play. Yeah. If you're going to be out of place, you better fall back into figure out that you're in the right place, that going the wrong way kind of thing.
Yeah, so I think that's, for him, that's been a problem. Very slow on reads and, catching the blockers instead of attacking gaps. But, if what Randy says is true, we should see some improvement from Dix this spring.
Then a couple more guys that Adam mentioned, Daryl Jackson and Gilbert Edmond, two more transfer portal guys, and Dennis Briggs. I think the fascinating thing is we've been impressed with both Daryl and Gilbert Edmond. And basically he says Daryl Jackson starting to show improvement and live up to his potential, which he's certainly an impressive guy to watch in practice, and listen, I think, as we talked about last week, I think his presence has helped make that whole defensive line better. Because it stepped up the level of competition amongst that group. And then Gilbert has a ways to go, but is capable to help us win a lot of football games, can be an impactful edge player. I think we all think that. I think it's just a matter of him getting more reps in this particular defense. What do you guys think about Gilbert?
Yeah, I think Gilbert flashes. Yeah, I mean, for sure, you can see what they liked in that athleticism out of him. Again, the kind of track/football guy who brings a lot there. I thought it was an interesting way that the question about Dennis Briggs was phrased. In that,
I was
has
going to that next.
all right, you go for it. 'Cause I thought it was
No,
a
yeah,
really
just say
interesting
it.
question.
Yeah, all
Yeah,
right. So essentially, when he was asked about Dennis Briggs, it was, I think Adam kind of took exception to the question a little bit because it was almost like, well, you got what you got with Dennis Briggs. I don't listen. It's hard to hear the question, right? I mean, you can't hear it on the audio tape. It was just he's got 1,200 something snaps. He kind of is what he is, and I really don't know where he was going with the question. I'm going to be honest about that. And it's not a again, I could not hear the entire question, so I don't know how the question ended. I only know what Adam said, and that is they still think that Dennis Briggs has a tremendous amount of upside. And one of the reasons he is not, and Adam did mention this, and I'm sure it was, and it's true, both on the offensive and defensive line. But Adam said, listen, in a lot of systems, you're not going to start showing your best football as a defensive lineman until your third or fourth year. And he also mentioned to Dennis Briggs in particular, and we've seen this. Dennis Briggs has been kicked. I mean, he's been at end, he's been at tackle, back to end, back to tackle. He's never had a spot. And listen, there are things that transfer to each of those positions that move from one to the other, but there are some things that you do differently at one through the. I mean, your responsibilities at defensive end technically are much different than they are at defensive tackle. Now, some of the flat back, violent hands, bringing power with your second step, all those things are consistent at both positions. But he's had to learn 4 different positions because the strong side defensive end does not do the same thing the weak side defensive end. Is it run to, run away? Anyway, long story short, I over elaborate my point. He has played multiple positions, and I think what Adam was trying to say, that may have slowed his progress at any one particular position. So, Bob, with that, I'll let you take it away because obviously, I've always been an advocate of Dennis Briggs, and we do know the year he came back from COVID, they inserted him in a game right away, and he was having a very productive year before he got hurt. I believe that was 2020, if I'm not mistaken. But anyway, just your thoughts on what was said and what we've seen from Dennis.
Yeah, Dennis, a sixth-year guy too. I mean, a guy who's been around college football for a long time. He's played end and tackle. We thought going into the spring this could be a potential starter. I think he could still be a potential starter, but in the end, we're looking at 4, 5, 6, some kind of mix at that defensive tackle position where we know there's a ton of depth. And again, I'm not so caught up with who's the starter as much as who's fighting, who's competitive, who's giving good reps for the offensive lineman across from him too. But yeah, to your point, Pat, what did he have? The chop block against Louisville, I think in 21. So he lost the majority of that year. 2020 came in late during the COVID year. So he is a sixth-year guy, but because of all these position moves, because of losing big chunks of 2 years, I mean, he's a great guy to have in the mix. I don't know if he's an NFL guy like Adam Fuller is trying to sell to us. I just don't know if he is, but I think he's a guy I definitely want on my college football team as far as experience and versatility.
Yeah, listen, when it comes to any of them that want to play in NFL, and almost all the players do, I hope they get their shot. I hope they make it. But to your point, what I want to see is them be good, productive football players for Florida State. And we do think that this is a guy that can not only be a starter quality, but also a guy that is, whether he's a starter or not, he's going to play a tremendous amount of snaps because Odell and JP do want to cycle those guys in and out. You see it all the time. And listen, it's not about who starts. It's about how there's going to be a battle for reps, regardless. And we have seen Dennis be a starter. We've seen him be a backup. Sometimes we're like, why isn't Dennis Briggs on the field? He goes, I mean, but anyway, I think that I kind of agree with Adam that he's probably in line for his better years. I still think he has some upside because he's finally now going to be at that 3 technique position, and he'll have all year to play there. And he's not, hopefully you don't have to kick him out anywhere else. I mean, other than have to kick him out the defensive end this year. We'll see. Long way to go. But yeah, no.
I think, Pat, one thing I'd say, he's changed his body since he's been here. You know, when he came here, you could have played him at defensive end, or you could have played him at tackle. You know, he looked like you could go either way with him. I think he has now grown into a defensive tackle. He's appreciably bigger than me, and I think he's a defensive tackle now. I think they've told him that. He's settled into it, and now let's see between now and November if he can get on the NFL radar, because he's going to be locked in at one spot. But what I like about the kid is, you know, you need pass rushers. You need your defensive lineman to get after a quarterback and to have some lateral pursuit. And we kind of lacked that with Cooper last year. And even with Fabian Lovett wasn't the most dynamic of pass rushers. You know, he's a little bit hurt, you know, throughout the year. And so I'm hoping Briggs can give us that.
Yep. And talking about Fabian does look like he is moving better than any time he did last year, at least through the first 2 weeks of spring, at least to me.
Big.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, he's a big man.
Yes, he is. He's a big dude. There's no doubt about that. And listen, Dennis Briggs, I don't think people really understand when you're not a surefire NFL guy, to come back for your 6 years, a major decision. I mean, and there are a lot of things that aren't as tough about college football as they were 20 years ago. There's probably some things that are tougher. But to come back for a 6 year, I think says something about how Dennis and some of these kids feel about this program and what they're doing here. Because coming back for 6 years, it gets laborious. Practice is just, we talked about this Thursday practice. Not every kid's going to have a great practice every time out. I mean, it's just not the nature of the beast, either because somebody's outperforming you, you just don't have it that day. But to come back for a 6 year and go through a sixth off season and all of those things, I don't think people realize how tough it is. So I think Dennis coming back, and he's probably not the only 6 year guy if I went back and looked at the roster. But long story short, I think it says a lot that when you get a guy coming back for a 6 year, particularly when he does not know if he has anything to gain from it from an NFL standpoint. So anyway,
we're in uncharted waters there, because it used to be if you did 4 years, that was a lot.
Yeah.
And then 5 years, oh my goodness, who would want to come back for the fifth year?
I remember when I went to college, I said, I'm playing forward. Whether they redshirt me or not, I think you got me for 4 years, and I'm moving on to whatever's next. And at that time, I thought it was going to be coaching, but it did not turn out to be that way. All right, so let's get to Alex Atkins. We have not talked about what Alex said. Thankfully, for the sake of this podcast, videocast, he did not speak as long as Adam or Mike, so this segment of the show should be shorter. But what were your takeaways from what Alex had to say after the scrimmage?
Well, I think the big thing for me was, he was asked the question about continuity, which is like paramount to me. But in the spring, he said, we're not seeking continuity. We're seeking combinations and trying guys at different positions. And you worry about continuity when you get to the fall. So, when we interviewed Roddick, I thought it was a funny question. I asked him how long had he played center? When did he start playing center? And he said, I've never played until this week, and he has no experience at center. So here you are going against a pretty good defensive front, and you got a center who has never been in a scrimmage before as a center. You're going to have some problems, right?
Yep.
But you have to go through those experiences to develop him. And as we know, with Smith, the starter, you need a backup ready to go because of Smith's had a history of getting nicked, and he's a tough kid. And he'll play through a lot of that. But having a backup, I think, is one of the biggest things you could come out of this spring with, and that's what to me stood out. I'm not worried about continuity. I want to put people in different positions to find out who they are.
Yeah, and listen, he said and Mike mentioned going back to what he said, but he mentioned Casey as well, and the fact that they were lighting him up at guard and at center, and then of course Alex had mentioned that same thing, and that they're also taking a look at Quayshawn Sapp at center as well. So that center battle seems to be involving three people right now, and listen, if Quayshawn excuse me, develops, you may see Casey be able to make a full-time move to guard, and you have the luxury of having to be able to plug him in at center if you need him. So I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. But, listen, we knew that we were going to see some cross-training, as Alex always likes to talk about. But they both mentioned Casey, Mike and Alex in their statements. And obviously, Casey's going to have a chance to play at both positions, but they also Alex also mentioned Quayshawn, so obviously he's doing a good job there at center as well. So it's going to be fascinating. We thought coming into the season or to the spring that if we felt like that one of the reasons Casey was brought in was to compete at center, and we felt like if whoever established themselves, we would see the other guy move. And so it sounds like maybe, they feel really good about Maurice, and now they're going to see, hey, Casey, how do you fit in at guard with this particular offensive line? So yeah, I think that's we knew we were going to see that to some extent. Bob, what stood out to you about Alex?
Yeah, I thought the one interesting observation I think he mentioned about the offensive line is it's not so much, he wants to put a player where he thinks the player's going to be the most comfortable. It's he's going to put the player in a spot where he thinks he's going to be uncomfortable, and he's okay, and he thinks the players will be okay from a confidence standpoint with, hey, that rep didn't go great. I've never played this position. This is a different technique of a guy I'm going up against. So I think just there is that time to tinker in the spring. And I think I like that the players are veteran, they're experienced enough to be willing to move around and to try some different things. That's what cross training is all about. Yeah, I think the other things with Atkins that really impressed me, again, Rodney Hill, a guy that we've been very, very high on. I think consistently since probably last spring, but we've seen his body change a lot. He's added that weight. Again, last year there just wasn't the opportunity for him to play as much with the Trayshawn Ward moving on. Now you're starting to ask who are going to get those other reps outside of a Trey Benson, who's going to get the carries and the receptions out of the backfield. And I'm really buying into Rodney Hill being one of those guys who's there, potentially to surpass a Lawrence Toafili type who can jump up that depth chart.
Yeah, there's a lot of depth at running back, and we've seen Keziah Holmes flash at times where you're like, oh, you almost forget about him, right? And because you got Trey Benson, you got Lawrence Toafili, now you've got a Rodney Hill who the coaching staff really seems to be in love with because every coach mentions him when they talk about it. Of course, now. A couple of things that, he mentioned a couple of young guys on the offensive line, a guy that we have talked about in our conversations at practice getting better, Julian Armella. Basically that he likes the work ethic that Julian brings. He's got the bigger concepts, the bigger techniques down, but it's kind of more the learning the nuances of the position that he's got to get better at. We've seen him not overextend so much, so obviously – it's one of those things where every rep he gets, he's getting a little bit better. He, again, mentioned Quayshawn Sapp and then talked about Bryson Estes, who he mentioned getting a ton of reps because he's running with 2s and 3s. We think that's a guy that as this spring goes along may interject himself more into the first-team battle and get some reps with the first team, however they're doing that. But just your thoughts on those three guys.
I've been seeing Bryson Estes become solid. I think he's a legitimate prospect to start, but certainly gives you a guy I could depend on as a backup. I think he's earned that already. Julian Armello moves better than any lineman I think I've short of Jamie Dukes maybe. I mean, that kid moves so well when he's pulling or doing something laterally. I think he's an uber talent.
Yeah.
And the coaches do need to hold him accountable for the little things, and like you said, Pat, for overextending. But those are two really good players. For the future. And, of course, Sapp, I think, is just, he's another guy in development.
Yeah. Well, listen, they will scrimmage next weekend. Right now, we think it's closed. We'd love a surprise and have it open, but I don't think that's going to be the case. And if you're a listener or a viewer, you might be glad of that because we just did 50 minutes of things that we did not talk about, that we did not see. We broke reading the tea leaves through other people's eyes. But listen, as I said, some of the neat things about this is when you hear these coaches speak, it validated some of the things that we thought we were seeing at practice. So another reason to subscribe to the Osceola or FloridaState.Rivals.com. This is validation Monday for us, I guess. I don't know how you want to call it any other way, but they have validated some things that we have thought about. And of course, listen, we're going to get into a couple things real quick. I'm going to hit on recruiting. They did host about 36 to 50 prospects on campus this weekend, Friday, Saturday. We've seen a great turnout even on a Tuesday practice. We've seen some fairly high-profile kids come in the middle of the week. Of course, you got a lot of schools around the country that are on spring break, and you see some of these kids planning these trips out as they go from one school to the next. But, listen, Fish and I are going to come back later in the week. Fish is at the Miami Rivals camp this weekend, and he is busy today trying to finish that and put a bow on that, get with the people he needs to get with. But Fish and I will have a more in-depth podcast, video cast about not only Florida State's recruiting weekend, but the kids he saw at the Miami Rivals camp. But we saw a number of high-profile kids on FSU's campus. Bob and Jerry, you were both down there with me at times, but we saw four-star defensive end Elias Rudolph, 6'4", 220 pounds from Deerfield Beach. It was his first visit to campus. He is a Florida transplant. He has just moved to Florida recently from Ohio. He said he's down to 9 schools, but this was his first visit in Tallahassee, and said it was not going to be his last. So you have to feel like Florida State is in that top 9. I don't think that we're old school. Like, I don't really start paying attention until a guy says I got top 5 or 6, because 99% of the time they're not going to go to somewhere they don't go on an official visit. They only get 5 of those. So once they start talking top 5, top 7, I kind of tune in a little bit more. But listen, he likes what he saw from the defensive ends, thought they showcased themselves well in the scrimmage, talked about the upfront nature that Mike spoke to him with, and they had a lot of respect for how Mike handled their meeting. But certainly sounds like Florida State has put themselves in a good position with Elias Rudolph, again, a 4-star defensive end from Deerfield Beach. He's a Rivals top 250 prospect, and he's the 16th ranked weak side defensive end in the country, and a guy that they've really kind of are just starting to build that relationship with. Again, a guy that has not been in Florida very long, but certainly, as he said, since they found out about me, they have constantly been on my heels. So just let you know that Florida State's got a more than passing interest in Elias Rudolph, and apparently that was reciprocated by the end of his visit there. The other big name in town was 4-star offensive tackle Marquise Easley, 6'7", 315, and I'm going to screw this name up. Kankakee, Illinois. I guarantee you that's not how you pronounce it, but that's where he's from. We're just going to assume that it's somewhere near Chicago because it's in Illinois, and anywhere in Illinois is somewhere near Chicago. But anyway, listen, he's another guy that was Bob, you and I talked about it. He mentioned that he had a top 10, and he didn't elaborate on who that top 10 was. Said Florida State has been in that top 10. he seems like a very bright kid that might be being coy on purpose to some extent, because he really did seem like a highly. I don't think he was doing it to. I think he's. It's a some kids are more private about their recruiting process than others, and some guys don't like to give it away. And maybe in the era NIL, that might be the way to go. To be quite honest with you, keep everybody guessing, including the schools that are recruiting you. But listen, a couple of things that he said. Again, we hear this all the time. He liked both Alex Atkins and Norvell's candid approach to how they spoke to him. He started off what did he talk with about Alex, the truth. What did he talk about with Mike, the truth. So whatever they're telling him, he is certainly believing. And we did ask him, where does FSU stack up? He did not divulge the top 10 or where anybody in that top 10 was. Now, listen, probably the one thing that he did said that kind of made my ears perk up, he was a fan of FSU run game. They ran the counter, the GT counter, guard tackle counter. He counted it 12 times, so he's paying attention. He says it's his favorite play to run in high school. And it's always fun when you find an offensive lineman, particularly in today's pass-happy offenses, that wants to be a mauler. But anyway, a really good-looking kid, a huge kid, 6'7", 315. You name it, he's pretty much got an offer from him. But he is another kid that looks like he will be back on campus at some other time. And then, of course, you had Monte Whedon, a linebacker from Washington, D.C., who he's a physical downhill guy, really was impressed with his tape. He said that he will likely be back. Obviously, he's a guy that said Florida State is number one on his board. But we also saw offensive lineman Robert Bourdon and John Wayne Oliver in town. We have interviews with Robert on the site right now. John Wayne Oliver left a little bit early. We were not able to catch him, but we did talk to Terrence Marshall and Ryan Mack, along with Marcus Easley. And Fish and I will break these guys down a little bit more. But, we've mentioned this before. They are doing a heck of a job of getting these kids on campus. And listen, if recruiting is a byproduct of work, Florida State's going to be very successful because they are working very hard at recruiting. They put off grading. Well, I assume they had to put off grading the tape until later in the afternoon on Saturday because they had so many kids on campus. But they are working at it each and every weekend. And, listen, we'll be back at it practice on Tuesday. And I'm sure we're going to see some good-looking prospects on campus tomorrow. And so we'll have that for you. Like I said, Fish and I will be back with the Miami Rivals camp results. He published his thoughts on our recruiting board. So if you want to go check out our theosceola.com premium recruiting board or floridastate.rivals.com recruiting board, they take you to the same place, but Fish has updated his notes. And excuse me, he'll have more on that later in the week when he and I get together. So that's gonna be it for football on the field. Jerry, and Bob, for that matter, you guys are both more knowledgeable about this than I am. But I don't think I've ever bought a ticket in my life to go anywhere. So anyway, not to a game, not just sporting event anyway. But long story short, the ticket policy at Florida State has changed. Jerry, kind of what led to this? What do our listeners, viewers, subscribers need to know?
Well, Florida State has a ticket priority policy that went into effect in 1977. I'm sure most of our listeners are aware. Every school has one, and it's basically tied to your booster contribution, and that booster contributions at every school, accounts for a very significant portion of the revenue in the athletic budget. At Florida State, it's somewhere around boosters support is about 35 to 40% of the total athletic budget. So what happens is every few years you have to take a look at your ticket priority policy and adjust it to suit your athletic budget needs. And I was in charge of that for 19 years. And I think the last ticket priority policy change we made, Ben Zierden and I were in charge of it in 2018, might have been 2019. So it's been a minute since Florida State has adjusted it. Most schools adjust their policy about every 3 years. So they're a little bit off on this one, but I'm sure COVID had an effect on that. So the way they're going to do it, they're going to make some changes that are different from our history. They're going to a model now that other schools have been going to in recent years, and therefore they call it modernizing our ticket priority policy. It used to be that if you gave, say, $1,300 for your seats in Doak, that same $1,300 might cover your seats in basketball. And what they're doing now is a per seat requirement in football and a per seat in basketball. Now they've had the per seat in basketball for a while, but now it'll count. If the per seat in basketball is $250 and you have 2 seats, that's $500. And if your per seat in football is $250 and you have 2 seats, that's another $500. So you would be required to give $1,000 or more in order to keep those 2 seats in both sports. So, a Tomahawk $1,300 donor would be fine. It wouldn't affect them. They would give the $1,300 and they'd get their Tomahawk parking, and they'd get their 2 seats in both sports. If they were in a $500 section, then what would happen is their requirement would go up to what? $2,000. $500 for each seat in football, and then $500 for each seat in basketball. That's $2,000 total. There would still be a Tomahawk, but a $2,000 Tomahawk.
Hey, Jerry, we don't take math questions on the show.
Yeah, I got you.
It's just too hard. Even 500 times 4, I cannot. My brain just cannot do that.
So
I'm sorry. I was an English history guy.
Yeah, so that's how the policy is affecting our listeners, the people who buy the seats bet. So now they've also added to the policy, and it was something I tried to do for 15 years and never could get it accomplished because in baseball we've never had a policy. Everybody else does, but Florida State didn't want to have a policy in baseball. So they've implemented a policy in baseball now, as well as soccer and women's softball. So you now have 5 sports, women's basketball too, I guess. So there's 5, I guess. Is that right? Does that add up? Can you do arithmetic, Pat?
Well, yeah, I can do. I can't spell it, but I can. Basic addition, I can do. Yes.
So they've expanded the number of sports.
5. Yeah, 5.
Yeah, and I'm glad that for Title IX and gender equity, we should be asking for contributions in women's sports as well as men's sports. So those are things I think that. Now let me just say this, and even at this, they surveyed for 2 years the other schools around the Southeast, both ACC and SEC. And it was something that I did every time we did a ticket priority policy change. I surveyed all the schools. And Florida State was asking less than half of what any of the other schools were asking. And I'm talking about ACC schools too. And it's a tougher market here in Tallahassee because of the drive time. Our fans live so far away, and they're asked to, if they're going to come to a home game, they're going to be, they're either going to stay on my couch or they're going to pay a 2-night minimum, at a hotel. And, it gets to be $1,000 a week.
Real quick.
And you got 7 games. So our fans, before they give Florida State a nickel, are spending $7,000 with other people. So it makes it tough on the university to implement the same ticket priority ask as a school like Gainesville, where everybody that's in that stadium is driving home that night.
2 hours probably.
Yeah, they got 10 million people within a 2-hour drive.
Yeah, you got Tampa, Orlando, Jacksonville within less than 2 hours.
It's they reached Daytona, so it's Gainesville is just ideally located, and surprisingly, when you look at cow towns like Clemson and Auburn, they have 10 million people within a couple of hours, within 150 miles, because they pick up Atlanta.
Yep.
And we don't have that. And so when FSU changes its ticket priority policy, they have to give that consideration in how much they're asking. And what I'll tell you, that one last thing I'll say is every time we've increased our ticket priority policy, we've lost a fraction of the local market, because the counties surrounding Leon County are 7 of the poorest counties in Florida.
Yep, blue collar.
Yep, and so there's a lot of the median household income in the Big Bend is not near what it is. I was looking at it the other day on a message board post. I was even surprised. It's almost $10,000 a county less than the counties surrounding Gainesville.
That's crazy. Well, do you think
50,000 a year, 60,000 or 70 down in those counties?
Yeah.
Here, 30, 40, and 50,000 median household income. So when you're asking somebody to give $2,000 to keep 4 seats, that could be a decision between a family vacation and Florida State football.
Well, and those, obviously, the closer you are, the better chance you got to get a butt in the seat, right? So, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. As you said, history usually repeats itself, and every time they've done that. So, do you agree with the change? Do you understand why it was done and why it needed to be done?
I don't like them. I mean, I don't like any kind of change, but if you want to win and you want to be relevant, if you want to be elite, which is all I hear on our message boards, we want to be elite. Let's pay Mike. Let's pay his assistants.
They got paid.
Money's not an object, and bring in Link Jarrett in. That's the fan. And I posted on the message boards when this was going down. I said, be prepared. There's a ticket priority change following.
Hey, I looked outside my window about 3 weeks ago, and it was just raining green stuff. I don't know what I'm assuming it was money, but it was. I've never seen a sky that green before in
That's
Tallahassee.
called pollen, Pat. This is Tallahassee.
Oh, okay, all right. I'm confused. I thought it was Mike and the rest of the staff's phrases being delivered by Mother Nature. All right. So anything else on ticket policy, guys?
No, that's it.
All right.
It'll be tough on some of the fans as they figure out what the impact will be. The thing is, and it's easy to say, it's very difficult to do. I had thousands of those phone conversations, maybe 10,000 of those phone conversations over 19 years. And sometimes it seems as simple as, well, if you'll just move your seats one section over, you won't be affected by the policy. But man, these people have been sitting in those seats with their daddy, with their granddad. They feel like a certain ownership to the seats. And, that kind of loyalty is a wonderful thing to build. But when now you come back to those people who have been loyal to you for all these years and say, you're going to have to double your contribution or increase it by 25%. I mean, if they've got the money, it's one thing. But when they're having to make decisions about their kids' college education or their 401k or a family vacation, man, it gets real personal. I had my life threatened several times during those 19 years by people, and they get emotional, and I understand it, and that's what FSU is going to do is they're going to call each one of those people individually, and I'm sure a lot of them have already called the booster office to voice their opinion about the policy. But it's you must do it. There is no option.
Well, they're not turning back, right? I mean, so just lodge your complaint and move on.
Well, this is going on at Florida, Alabama, Auburn. Everybody's got a ticket priority policy. Everybody is dependent on individuals sharing their hard-earned money, or this doesn't work.
Yeah.
And
it also doesn't work if you don't put a winner on the field. There's more pressure to win now in all sports because people are investing more money into it.
Exactly. And our fans are the first to step up and say, hey, let's give Mike whatever we got to give him. Let's go get Link no matter what it costs. If our softball coach is getting offered by Auburn, our fans don't want Auburn to get her. They want the AD to spend whatever it takes to keep Lonnie Alameda here. And, at some point, you've got to go to those very fans and say, we did it. Now I need you to help us fund it.
Yep.
And it's going on every college campus in the country. Florida State is not unique.
Well, right now you're in a good spot with football because they high expectations and people love to watch a winner. So it was a good time to implement the policy coming off a 10-3 season. I'll give Mike credit for that. Perfect. If you're going to do something, you need to have great timing. And when you're coming off a very successful football season, when that's your main revenue generator, it's a good time to do it. So, well, it'll be interesting to see. I know you're probably glad you're not working at the booster office today. So that's good. All right. Speaking of Link Jarrett. All right. So Bob and I don't know if I know we've talked about this on the record. I don't know if we talked about it. I mean, I know we talked about it off the record. I don't know about on the record. So it was just 30 short days ago we were talking, and there were some people that cover their sport and fans in general that got a huge boost of adrenaline after taking 2 or 3 from TCU. And we've had people making reservations for Omaha and all kinds of things. Well, they go to Virginia this weekend, lose all 3 games, and have Florida, number 3 Florida, coming up tomorrow night, and then go down to Miami for a 3-game series in Coral Gables against the now number 17 ranked Miami Hurricanes. Bob, listen, we don't want to belabor the point. It's a bad weekend. 2 really I don't know if I want to say non-competitive. I didn't see the damn games. I just saw the score. And from a byline stand or a box score standpoint, certainly not. I mean, I did listen to Lulu, and every time it sounds like he spoke, he said another ball's leaving the yard. And then I finally I think I told you I turned it off. I was tired of hearing that. But anyway, just talk a little bit about the baseball team. I know Kurt Weiler wrote an article that's a commentary, editorial, whatever you want to call it, about kind of how his impressions of the baseball team have changed since 30 days ago. Because we all had a different feeling about the baseball team coming out of TCU, and Jerry and I sat right here in a staff meeting and warned everybody it was fired up. Whoa, slow it down a little bit. Not that I'm glad that we're right about this, because I'm not, but just talk a little bit about baseball.
Right. Kurt's got a good column just basically saying this is more of a fixer-upper than I think a lot of us had imagined. Link Jarrett is a very good coach, and I think you have to give him a lot of time when it comes to talent and player development. How much does he dip into the portal? How well does he recruit the state? We think he's going to do all those very well. It's just how much patience do you have? How much patience are you willing to provide? I think a couple of the toughest things, obviously, 32 errors through 24 games is tough to stomach. And there could have been a few more that could have been called errors that are called hits. That's just the nature of official scoring. So you have a couple of plays that have just not gone Florida State's way in some of these close games. There have been some very close ones. The Friday game I thought was managed and played about as well of a college baseball game as you can have. And you are one strike shy before a wild pitch then brings in a tying run in the ninth inning up at Virginia. So I think you have defensive issues that compound the pitching staff's lack of depth, lack of quality depth. Pitching and defense go together this year, not so much. These are truly the growing pains that Florida State's going through, and unfortunately, with Wyatt Crowell, your top pitcher, not being available the last 2 weekends. So, what is Wyatt's status moving forward is a huge storyline. How healthy does this team stay as they try to fight and regroup? Big questions. And of course, Florida State's got a long-standing streak of going to the NCAA tournament. I believe it's every year since 1980, Mike Martin Sr.'s first year. So it is a long streak. It is truly in jeopardy with 30 or so games to go. But there's a lot of baseball left to be played too.
Yeah, and strange things happen in baseball.
Florida State has another streak, and that's never have had a losing season. And that is on the line right now.
Well, I'd rather that one be protected than the NCAA tournament. I mean, they would have to be, right. I mean, you have to win more than you lose to go to the tournament. But my point is, I'd rather see them have a winning record more so than go to the NCAA tournament. I'd rather see that record extended. But yeah, so listen, there's a reason you have a new coach in town, and that's because things weren't always great on the old watch. It takes time, and the good news is I think Link's got plenty of it based on his contract. So I think it's going to be fine. I think everybody. I think we all got a little bit fired up after TCU. Go out there and play really good ball against a program that has been as good as any in the country over the last several years. So. Listen, you got a chance to right the ship 4 times this week, right? You got Florida once, Miami thrice, and rivalry games are rivalry games, no matter what sport you're playing. So we will see how that transpires. And it's not all bad news in the ball and stick department. You got the girls 2 out of 3 against Duke, which is a ranked team in the softball. Bob, I know you watched a little bit of the softball this weekend. What do we need to know?
Yeah, Seminoles played a top 15 series up at Duke, and they played very, very well. Of course, the Sunday game was shortened by rain and the travel curfew, but the Seminoles are 25-7. And I think there were some concerns about the team coming out of that Clearwater tournament, but they've played very well down the stretch here, and of course get into the meat of the ACC play. So good to see the Seminoles, dominating an ACC series in a lot of regards, but now coming back home to play Georgia Tech on Friday.
Yeah, and Georgia, so they're off until Friday and got a 3-game homestand, and I'm not sure if they head back out on the road after that. Some other things that are going on around campus on Friday, Florida State will have its pro day for its NFL prospects. Obviously, the big name that we'll be watching on Friday will be Jamie Robinson, probably of the guys that will be participating, probably the most highly valued prospect that Florida State has going into the NFL. And we talked to a NFC scout in December. He had Jamie as probably a 3rd-round guy. It was his draft grade on 3rd to 4th round. So it'd be fun to watch Jamie on Friday. All kinds of things going on. Again, we'll be here every day. We're going to be back out at practice on Tuesday. I don't know, Bob, did you decide to go to baseball tomorrow? Are you driving over to Jack's, or you decide against that? You decide the Sunshine Network would be okay.
If there is no rain and they decide to let us in the ballpark, we will try it yet again.
All right. Well, listen, it's going to be a fun week. We'll be back on Wednesday. It'll be a combination of me, Bob, Jerry, Kurt, combination of the guys that are at practice tomorrow. We'll have updates on any high-profile recruits that may be on campus for practice tomorrow. Obviously, get Kurt, Bob, and Jerry and my thoughts on what we saw on Tuesday on the practice field. And as always, want to thank our listeners and viewers for joining us. If you are not a subscriber, please go to theosceola.com or floridastate.rivals.com. We've got some free content, recruiting, baseball, basketball. We got a little bit of free content on football, but certainly if you enjoy the podcast, video cast, and what you read, we'd ask that you go to theosceola.com or floridastate.rivals.com and subscribe to us. We can also catch us on our Osceola YouTube channel, Osceola Twitter, and Osceola Facebook. And I want to thank Jerry and Bob for joining us. And we know we probably went a little bit longer than we normally do. Usually we shoot for an hour, but you've got, two of the three of us like to talk a lot. So I apologize about that. We'll try not to combo me and Jerry on the same show anymore. But we gotta get going. But anyway, listen, fun show, guys. Thanks for joining us. And we will be back Wednesday with another edition of Seminole Sidelines.
All right.